The champagne flute was cold against Grace Whitfield's fingers, and she gripped it too hard. Watching condensation bead down the glass like sweat she refused to let show on her own skin. Across the ballroom, under the gold light of a chandelier the size of a small car, Preston Hale was laughing at something a woman in red was saying, his hand resting on the small of her back like he owned it. He had done that to Grace once. Owned the space around her without asking permission. She had not expected to see him tonight. She had come to the Ashford Foundation Gala because her firm needed her here, because the museum wing renovation contracts were worth more to her career than her pride was worth to her ego, and because 6 months of avoiding every social event in Manhattan had started to look less like healing and more like hiding. But Preston was here, and his eyes had already found her twice across the room, and each time his mouth had curved into the smile of a man deciding whether to make a scene. Grace set the champagne down on a passing tray before her hand could shake and give her away. Then a voice, low and unhurried, spoke just behind her right shoulder. "Your ex is watching. Play along." She turned, and the words died in her throat. He was tall in the specific way that made a room recalibrate its sense of scale, dressed in a black suit that had clearly never touched a rack, the kind of tailoring that existed only for one body. His hair was dark, combed back without a single strand out of place, and his eyes were the color of good whiskey held up to candlelight, amber shot through with something that did not belong in a ballroom. A thin white scar traced the edge of his jaw, barely visible unless the light caught it right, and it caught it right now. He smelled like cedar and something underneath it, warmer, like tobacco left to age in a drawer. "Excuse me?" Grace said. "Preston Hale," the man said, tilting his head very slightly toward the crowd without breaking eye contact with her. "Investment banker, currently deciding whether to walk over here and remind you why you left him. You have about 10 seconds to decide if you want an audience for that conversation or not." Grace's spine went rigid. "How do you know his name?" "I know everyone's name in this room," the man said, and there was no arrogance in it, only fact, delivered the way a man might state the time. "Dante Moretti." He did not offer his hand, he offered his arm instead, angled just enough that anyone watching would read the gesture as an invitation already accepted. "I don't know you," Grace said. "No," Dante agreed, "but he's 20 feet away and closing, and in about 4 seconds he is going to reach us, and you are going to have to decide very quickly whether you want to have that conversation as the woman standing alone by the champagne table, or as the woman who is clearly, obviously, spoken for." Grace's pulse kicked hard against her throat. She glanced past his shoulder and saw Preston had, in fact, detached himself from the woman in red and was cutting a path toward them with the particular confidence of a man who had never once considered that a room might not want him in it. She had 2 seconds to decide. She took Dante Moretti's arm. His forearm was solid under the wool of his sleeve, and up close she could see the ring on his right hand. Heavy gold with a worn crest she did not recognize, the kind of ring that had been passed down rather than purchased. His hand did not close over hers in a way that felt like claiming. It felt instead like an anchor, steady and still, the opposite of the tremor she was fighting to hide in her own fingers. "Grace," Preston said, arriving with a smile that had once made her stomach flip and now made it turn for entirely different reasons. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Small world," Grace said, and was proud of how even her voice came out. Preston's eyes slid to Dante, doing the quick, practiced assessment men like him always did, cataloging the suit, the watch, the ring, the stillness. Something in his expression flickered, uncertain for half a second before he covered it with his usual ease. "And you are?" Preston asked. "Dante Moretti." He said it the way he had said it to Grace, unhurried, and did not extend his hand this time either. "Grace's date." The word landed in the air between the three of them like a dropped glass, and Grace felt her own face arrange itself into something she hoped read as fond rather than stunned. "I didn't realize you were seeing anyone," Preston said, and there it was. The thing she remembered. The faint edge under his pleasant tone that used to make her apologize for things that were not her fault. "There's a lot you don't realize anymore, Preston," Grace said, and the words came easier than she expected, propped up by the warm, solid presence of the stranger beside her. Preston's jaw tightened, just slightly, and his gaze moved back to Dante with something closer to wariness now. "Moretti," he repeated, like he was trying to place the name against a memory. Whatever he found there made him take half a step back. "Well, enjoy your evening." He left the way he had arrived, too fast to look natural, and Grace watched him retreat into the crowd before she remembered to breathe. "You can let go of my arm now," Dante said quietly. "He's not looking anymore." Grace realized she had not let go at all. She stepped back, putting a careful 18 inches between them, and finally allowed herself a full look at the man who had just rearranged the entire shape of her evening. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Because you looked like you were about to either cry or throw your champagne in his face, and neither would have served you well in a room full of people who write checks to my associates," Dante said. "And because I don't like the way he touched that woman's back. Like she was furniture he was deciding where to place." "You noticed that from across the room?" "I notice everything from across the room," Dante said, and something in the flatness of the statement made the back of Grace's neck prickle. "It's a professional habit." "What's your profession?" His mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Real estate. Investment. A little bit of everything that keeps this city interesting." It was the kind of answer that told her nothing and everything at once, and Grace, 5 years into a career built on reading contracts for the sentences people hoped she wouldn't notice, filed it away. "Well," she said, "thank you. For the rescue." "You didn't need rescuing," Dante said. "You needed an exit. There's a difference." He said it like it mattered to him that she understood the distinction, and Grace found herself studying his face for the first time without the adrenaline of Preston's approach clouding her attention. Up close, the stillness of him was unnerving. Most people in a room like this performed constantly, 100 small adjustments of posture and expression calibrated for who might be watching. Dante Moretti did none of that. He simply existed, and the room adjusted around him instead. "I should go find my colleagues," Grace said, because staying felt suddenly like standing too close to something with teeth. "Of course," Dante said, and stepped back to let her pass. No attempt to stop her, no lingering hand at her elbow. "Grace." She turned. "Yes?" "He won't bother you again tonight," Dante said. "That much I can promise." She did not ask him how he could be so certain. She told herself later that not asking had been the first mistake, though at the time it had felt like nothing at all, just a woman walking away from a stranger at a party, back into the noise and gold light, her pulse still not entirely her own. She found out how wrong she was about 40 minutes later, when she stepped out onto the terrace for air and heard 2 men speaking in low voices near the balustrade, unaware she was close enough to catch the edges of it. "Moretti's here," one of them was saying, tight and nervous. "I thought he didn't do these things anymore, not since Salvatore." "He's here for the Ashford renovation contracts," the other man said. "Word is he's moving money through legitimate channels now. Museums, foundations, clean paper." "Clean paper," the first man repeated, and laughed, short and humorless. "You believe that? Man's still got half the East Coast owing him favors they'll spend the rest of their lives paying off." Grace stood very still in the shadow of a stone urn, her heart suddenly loud in her own ears. She thought of the ring on his finger, worn smooth by years of wear that did not belong to a man who dealt only in condominiums and quarterly reports. She thought of the way the room had simply reorganized itself around his presence without him raising his voice once. She had just let a mafia boss claim her as his date in front of 200 witnesses, and she had thanked him for it. She should have left the terrace. She should have gone straight back inside, found her coat, and driven home without looking back. Instead, she stood there a moment too long, processing, and that moment was long enough for the door behind her to open and close, and for a voice she already recognized to speak from a few feet away. "You heard that." It was not a question. Grace turned to find Dante watching her, his expression unreadable in the dim terrace light, the city skyline glittering behind him like something out of a postcard that had learned to lie convincingly. "Is it true?" she asked, because there was no version of this where pretending she hadn't heard would work, not with a man who apparently noticed everything from across a room. "Which part?" Dante said. "Any of it, all of it." He considered her for a long moment, and something shifted behind his eyes, a calculation she could almost see him running. "My name is not one you should say too loudly in certain rooms," he said finally. "That much is true." "So you're dangerous." "I'm precise," Dante said. "There's a difference, though most people don't bother to learn it before it matters." Grace's mouth had gone dry. She thought about walking back inside, about finding her coat, about every rational instinct that told her a woman with a mortgage and a good job and a mother who called every Sunday did not linger on terraces with men whose names made grown men lower their voices near balustrades. She stayed anyway. "Why did you actually help me tonight?" she asked. "The real reason." Dante moved closer, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she caught the cedar and tobacco of him again, close enough to see the scar along his jaw was thin and old, the kind of mark that had healed a long time ago and been carried ever since. "Because I watched a man who used to have some claim on you walk toward you like he still had a right to make you flinch," Dante said. "And I don't like men who think ownership survives a breakup." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have tonight," he said, and there was something almost like an apology in it, though his voice never lost its even, deliberate register. "Go back inside, Grace. Find your colleagues. Forget the name Moretti by the time your car service arrives." "Will that work?" she asked. "Forgetting?" Something crossed his face that might have been the beginning of a real smile, gone before it fully formed. "No," he said, "but it's the polite thing to suggest." She did not forget. Not that night, lying awake replaying the low, unhurried cadence of his voice, and not 3 days later when a courier arrived at her firm's office with a thick manila envelope addressed to her personally. No return name, only the initials D.M. embossed in the corner of the seal. Inside was a contract for the Ashford Foundation's museum wing, the very account she had been fighting for months to land, restructured with terms so favorable her senior partner would weep actual tears reading them. A note was clipped to the front page, in handwriting as controlled as the man himself. "You handled Hale better than most people handle men twice as dangerous. Consider this a professional courtesy, not a debt owed. D.M." Grace read it 4 times before she called the number listed at the bottom, and when Dante Moretti answered on the second ring, his voice carried the faint amusement of a man who had known exactly how long it would take her. "You didn't have to do this," Grace said. No greeting, straight into it. "I know," Dante said. "I wanted to." "This isn't how business works. Nobody just hands over a contract like this out of professional courtesy." "I'm not most people," Dante said. "Have dinner with me and I'll explain the terms properly." It should have been the easiest no of her life. She had spent the last 6 months building a fortress out of caution, brick by brick, since Preston had taught her what happened when she let a man's confidence stand in for his character. She opened her mouth to say she was busy, that her calendar was full, that this was inappropriate given the professional nature of the contract now sitting on her desk. "Fine," she said instead, "but I'm reading every clause first, and I'm bringing a lawyer if the terms are as generous as they look." "Bring whoever you want," Dante said, and she could hear the smile in it this time, unmistakable. "I have nothing to hide from a contract." It was, she would think much later, the one lie he ever told her that wasn't really a lie at all, only an omission the size of an entire hidden world. Dinner was at a restaurant in Little Italy so unassuming from the street that Grace almost walked past it twice. No sign beyond a small brass plaque reading, "Nothing but a number." Inside, the space was warm and dim, exposed brick and low gold light, and the moment Dante walked through the door, the maitre d's posture changed. The kitchen staff visible through the pass straightened. A hush moved through the room the way weather moves across water. "They know you here," Grace observed as they were seated at a private table in the back, away from the front windows. "My family has owned this building for 60 years, Dante said. "The restaurant is only the front room." "And what's the back room?" "Dinner first," Dante said. "Honesty after." She had expected performance. She had expected a man used to intimidating rooms to try to charm her the same way, all polish and practiced lines. Instead, he asked her questions and listened to the answers like they mattered. About her work auditing contracts for a firm that specialized in non-profit real estate deals. About the years she had spent building a reputation as the person who read the fine print nobody else bothered to read. About why she had left Preston 8 months ago after finding the second phone. "He never hit me," Grace said, unprompted, somewhere between the appetizer and the wine, surprising herself with how easily it came out. "I want to be clear about that. It was smaller than that. It was just constant. The way he corrected me in front of people, the way he made every room feel smaller when he walked into it, like there wasn't enough air for both of us." "That's not smaller," Dante said, and something dark moved behind his eyes. "That's just violence that hasn't found its hands yet." Grace set down her fork. "You say things like that very calmly for a man who just described violence." "I've seen real violence," Dante said. "I know the difference between the loud kind and the quiet kind. The quiet kind is worse. It doesn't leave marks people can point to." "Is that experience talking or observation?" Dante was quiet for a moment, turning his wine glass slowly by the stem, and when he answered, his voice had lost some of its careful ease. "My brother Salvatore ran with a crowd that believed loyalty was the same as ownership. He learned that lesson too late, from a man he trusted, and it cost him everything. I don't romanticize what quiet cruelty does to a person. I've buried what it leaves behind." "I'm sorry," Grace said, and meant it, the words landing somewhere real between them. "Don't be," Dante said. "It's the reason I noticed you across that ballroom in the first place. You had the exact look on your face that he had, right before the end. The look of someone doing arithmetic on how much longer they can survive being made smaller." The honesty of it startled her, raw in a way she had not expected from a man built entirely of stillness and control. She studied him across the candlelight and found herself, against every rule she had made for herself since Preston, wanting to know more. "So what's the back room?" she asked. "You said honesty after dinner." Dante set down his glass. "I run an organization that some people call a family business, and others call something with worse words attached. I move money, I move influence, and yes, sometimes I move things that don't officially exist in the eyes of the law. The contract I sent you was real. Every clause of it will hold up under any audit you want to run. But I want you to understand exactly who signed it before you decide to work with me again." Grace felt the floor of the evening tilt. The warmth of the wine and the conversation suddenly sharpened into something with edges. "Am I in danger sitting here?" she asked. "No," Dante said, immediate and certain. "Not from me. Not from anyone in this room. You're in danger from what people will assume about you if they see you with me too often, and I owed you the truth about that before it became a problem you didn't choose." "Why tell me at all? You could have just let me sign a real estate contract and never explained a thing." "Because I don't like starting things on a foundation of lies," Dante said. "I've watched what that does to people. And because you looked at Preston Hale tonight the way I look at men who think they can outmaneuver me. Like you were already 3 steps ahead of what they thought you knew. I don't meet many people who look at anything that way." The restaurant noise faded around them, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them charged with something Grace did not have a safe name for yet. "I should say no to all of this," she said finally. "The contract, the dinner, whatever this is." "You should," Dante agreed. "Most sensible people would. But you're not going to talk me out of it." "No," Dante said. "I'm not in the business of talking people out of their own choices. Only informing them well enough to make good ones." Grace picked her wine back up, her hand steadier than she expected it to be. "Then tell me about the museum contract. Every clause. I meant what I said about reading the fine print." They spent the next hour going through the terms line by line, and Grace watched Dante Moretti argue his own contract's provisions against her, the way a man might spar with someone he respected, conceding points, defending others, never once condescending to her expertise. By the time the check came, which he paid before she could see the amount, she understood 2 things with equal certainty. The contract was airtight and genuinely favorable, no trap hidden anywhere in it, and she was in far more danger from this man than any clause on paper could capture, because she liked him, entirely and inconveniently. And liking Dante Moretti was a decision with consequences she had not yet begun to calculate. The consequences arrived 9 days later, on a Tuesday, in the parking garage beneath her office building. Grace was walking to her car, keys already in hand, mind still half occupied with a closing call from that afternoon, when a man stepped out from between 2 concrete pillars, blocking her path with the deliberate casualness of someone who had been waiting. "Grace Whitfield," the man said. He was heavyset, wearing a jacket too warm for the season, and his eyes had the flat, assessing quality she now recognized, having spent enough evenings across the table from Dante to know what that kind of stillness usually meant. This man's stillness was different. It was hungrier. "Can I help you?" Grace asked, already calculating the distance to her car, to the elevator, to the security booth she could see blinking red in the distance. "You've been spending time with Dante Moretti," the man said. "Careless of you. Or maybe not careless. Maybe you know exactly what you're doing, cozying up to a man who controls half the construction contracts on the East Side." "I don't know what you're talking about," Grace said, keeping her voice level, the way she had once talked down an angry client threatening to sue over a misread clause. "Sure you don't." The man smiled, and it did not reach his eyes any more than Dante's rare smiles did, though the effect could not have been more different. "Tell Moretti that Falcone sends his regards. Tell him the Ashford contracts belong to people with older claims than his, and tell him if he wants to keep using pretty auditors as his personal shield, he should know we're not afraid to remind them what happens to people who stand too close to the wrong man." He stepped closer, and Grace's hand tightened around her keys, one long metal edge angled between her knuckles, a habit from a self-defense class she had taken years ago and never expected to use. "You should leave," she said. "Now." "Or what?" the man said, amused. "You'll call your boyfriend? He's not here, sweetheart. It's just you and me and a very empty garage." She did not scream. She did not freeze. She thought of Dante saying she was never purely a witness in her own life, and she moved, fast and sharp, driving the edge of her key hard into the meat of the man's forearm as he reached for her, twisting away before his grip could close, her heels loud and uneven against the concrete as she sprinted for the elevator bank, slamming the call button with the flat of her hand, heart a fist against her ribs. The doors opened just as the man's footsteps closed the distance, and Grace threw herself inside, hitting the button for the ground floor lobby with the security desk, watching the doors slide shut on the man's furious face a half-second before he could reach the gap. She did not stop shaking until she was in the lobby, in view of the security guard, in view of witnesses, and even then her hands trembled so hard she could barely dial the number saved in her phone under the name Dante had insisted she use instead of his, a joke between them now that felt suddenly, terribly serious. He answered before the first ring finished. "Grace?" "There was a man," she said, the words tumbling out too fast. "In the parking garage. He said his name was Falcone. He said something about the Ashford contracts. He said to tell you he sends his regards." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a second, but it carried a weight Grace had never heard from him before, something cold and absolute settling into place. "Are you hurt?" Dante said. Not a question shaped like concern, a question shaped like the first item on a list he was already assembling. "No, I got away. I'm in the lobby. There are people around." "Stay there. Don't go back to your car tonight. I'm sending someone in 11 minutes. A man named Rocco. He'll show you a photograph of himself on his phone before he approaches so you know it's him. You will not leave that lobby with anyone else. Do you understand me? Not a delivery driver, not a coworker, not a police officer unless they show you a badge, and you call the precinct yourself to confirm it." "Dante, what is happening?" "Someone is testing a boundary they should not be testing," Dante said, and his voice had dropped into a register Grace had not heard before, quiet in a way that made the hair on her arms rise. "It will be handled. You will not see that man again." "That sounds like a promise a person makes right before something terrible happens." "It is," Dante said, without hesitation, without apology. "I told you at dinner what I am. This is what that means in practice. I am sorry you had to learn it in a parking garage instead of from me directly." 11 minutes later, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and an easy smile that did nothing to soften the gun visible beneath his jacket introduced himself as Rocco and walked Grace to a black car waiting at the curb, and by the time she arrived at the address Dante had given her, an apartment far nicer than her own on the 22nd floor of a building overlooking the park, her hands had finally stopped shaking. Dante was waiting in the doorway when the elevator opened, and the moment he saw her, something in his controlled expression cracked, just slightly, just enough for Grace to see the fear underneath the stillness before he mastered it again. "I should never have let this touch you," he said, low, as she stepped off the elevator. "You didn't let anything happen," Grace said. "A man tried to intimidate me in a parking garage because of who I've been having dinner with. That's not the same thing." "It's exactly the same thing," Dante said. "Falcone knows I don't have many soft points left in the world. My family, my associates, they're armored against this kind of thing by necessity. You're not. He found the one place I'm not prepared to defend the way I defend everything else." "Then let me help you defend it," Grace said. Dante's eyes searched her face like he was looking for the version of her that would run, the sensible woman who would take one look at a man like Falcone and decide the contracts, the dinners, all of it, were not worth what came next. He did not find her. "You should be terrified of me right now," he said quietly. "Instead, you're standing in my doorway offering to help fight my enemies." "I've spent the last 3 years reading contracts specifically designed to bury bad intentions in good language," Grace said. I'm very good at finding what people are trying to hide. If Falcone thinks he can use paper claims to steal the Ashford contracts out from under you, I promise you I can find the hole in his paperwork faster than any lawyer he's paying." Something shifted in Dante's expression, surprise giving way to something warmer, something he seemed to fight against showing, and then, for the first time since the ballroom, let win. "Come inside," he said. "Let me show you what Falcone actually filed with the City Planning Commission. If you can find the hole, you may just save both our lives." They worked until nearly 3 in the morning at his dining table, documents spread between them, Grace's pen moving fast across page after page of zoning applications and shell company filings, Dante watching her work with an intensity that had nothing to do with the paperwork and everything to do with her, until finally she set down the pen and looked up at him. "Here," she said, tapping a subsection 3 pages deep in a filing Falcone's people had submitted 8 months prior. This entity, Falcone listed as majority stakeholder in the renovation bid, dissolved in March. It doesn't legally exist anymore. His entire claim to the Ashford contracts is built on a company that's been dead for 6 months. If you file a challenge with the city citing this, his bid collapses before he can even threaten you with it again. Dante stared at the page, then at her, and the look on his face was one she had not seen from him before. Something unguarded and almost disbelieving. "You just ended a war that would have taken me months to win with guns and money," he said. "With a pen." "I told you," Grace said. "I'm very good at reading fine print." He reached across the table then and covered her hand with his, and it was not the same steady, anchoring grip from the ballroom. It was something else. Something that trembled faintly at the edges despite his best control, and when he spoke her name this time, it came out different than she had ever heard it. Softer, cracked open at the center. "Grace." "Yes," she said. "I did not expect you," he said. "I want you to understand that. In this life, I plan for everything. I did not plan for you." She turned her hand beneath his so their palms met, and the silence between them stretched, charged, neither of them looking away. "I should tell you to send me home," Grace said quietly. "You should," Dante agreed. "I'm not going to ask you to." He kissed her then, slow and certain, the first crack in 6 months of carefully built armor on both sides of the table. And Grace let herself fall into it without calculating the cost. For the first time since Preston had taught her caution was survival. It did not last. 3 days later, Falcone's challenge to the Ashford contracts collapsed exactly as Grace had predicted. His shell company exposed and his bid thrown out by the City Planning Commission in a decision that made the business section of 2 newspapers. It should have been the end of it. Instead, it made Falcone desperate. And desperate men, Dante had told her once, were the only kind worth truly fearing, because they had stopped calculating costs. Grace was leaving her office building on a Thursday evening when a car pulled up too fast at the curb, and 2 men she did not recognize stepped out, moving with the kind of urgency that told her instantly this was not a negotiation. "Get in the car," one of them said, and Grace saw the outline of a weapon beneath his jacket, no longer hidden the way Rocco's had been, meant to be seen. She did not get in the car. She turned and ran back toward the revolving door of her building, shouting for the security guard by name, and the chaos of the lobby, cameras, witnesses, an alarmed guard reaching for his radio, was enough to make the 2 men abandon the attempt and peel away from the curb before security could reach them, but not before one of them shouted something through the open window that Grace would replay for days afterward. "Tell Moretti this was a courtesy. Next time we don't ask nicely." She called Dante from the security office, her voice steadier this time, adrenaline burning through her rather than freezing her. And when he arrived 20 minutes later, he was not the controlled, still man she had come to know. He was something closer to the wound beneath the control, raw and furious in a way that made the security guards in the room instinctively step back. "This ends tonight," Dante said, after Grace had recounted everything, after Rocco had arrived with 2 more men and taken up positions at every door of the building. "I should have ended it the moment Falcone touched the garage. I was too careful. I was trying to win this without you seeing the parts of me that aren't clean, and that mistake almost got you taken off a public street." "What are you going to do?" Grace asked. Though some part of her already knew, the answer did not belong to the world of contracts and city commissions anymore. "Whatever it takes to make sure Falcone understands that touching you again means the end of everything he has," Dante said. "I won't pretend that's a clean solution. I won't ask you to be comfortable with what it means. But I need you somewhere safe while it happens, and I need you to trust that I will come back to you when it's finished." Grace looked at him, at the fury banked behind his eyes, at the man who had built an empire on being colder and more controlled than anyone else in every room he entered, now standing in front of her stripped down to something that looked almost like fear. And she understood, with sudden clarity, that she was not going to simply wait somewhere safe while other people decided the shape of her life. "I'm not hiding," Grace said. "I found the hole in Falcone's paperwork once already. Let me help you finish this the way I know how, before anyone else has to get hurt doing it the way you're used to doing it." "Grace, this isn't a contract dispute anymore." "No," she agreed. "But you said yourself, Falcone is desperate, and desperate men make mistakes on paper because they're too busy making mistakes with guns. Let me find what else he's hiding. Give me 24 hours before you do this your way." Dante's jaw worked, the calculation of a man used to controlling every variable warring visibly with something that looked, for the first time, like trust extended past the point of comfort. 24 hours, he said finally, and you do not leave Rocco's sight for a single one of them. It took Grace only 16. Buried in Falcone's public filings, cross-referenced against a federal database she had access to through her firm's compliance division, she found what she had suspected from the first night in the parking garage, that Falcone had been laundering money through the very construction bids he was fighting Dante over, using invoices for renovation work that had never actually been performed on 3 separate properties. A fraud so blatant it had simply never occurred to him that anyone would look closely enough to find it, because in his world, nobody ever had. She handed the file to Dante at 2 in the morning, spread across his dining table exactly where they had sat together the first time, and watched his expression shift from fury to something colder and infinitely more controlled as he understood exactly what she had given him. "This isn't a threat I have to answer with violence," he said slowly. "This is something I can hand to a federal prosecutor with a grudge against Falcone's family already. This ends him without a single shot fired." "I know," Grace said. "That's why I found it." Dante looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost every trace of its careful distance. "You just saved my life a second time, and you did it without a weapon, without violence, without anything but paper and patience. I don't know how to tell you what that means to a man who has only ever solved problems with force." "You don't have to tell me," Grace said. "You just have to let me stand next to you while you use it." He crossed the space between them and kissed her again, harder this time, less careful, the last of his restraint finally giving way, and when he pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, he said her name once more, low and certain. "Grace, I need you to understand what staying means. It means Falcone's associates will know your name permanently. It means federal prosecutors may eventually want to know why you have access to information you shouldn't. It means a life that will never again be as simple as auditing contracts and going home at 6 o'clock. I stopped wanting simple the night you told a room full of strangers you were my date, Grace said. I'm not asking you to protect me from your world anymore. I'm asking you to let me stand in it with my eyes open. Falcone was arrested 9 days later on federal wire fraud charges. The case built on documentation so thorough that his own lawyers reportedly advised him to take the first plea deal offered. His territory, what little of it survived the collapse of his finances, was quietly absorbed by associates loyal to Dante, and the name Falcone stopped being spoken in rooms where Dante Moretti's name still commanded silence. Grace stood beside him 3 weeks later at the reopening gala for the Ashford Foundation's museum wing, the very event that had started everything, wearing a dark green dress that was not the same one from that first night, but carried the same quiet defiance in its cut. And when Dante crossed the room toward her, his hand finding the small of her back with a touch that owned nothing and claimed everything at once, no one in the room mistook it for anything other than what it was. You look like you're calculating the cost of this chandelier again, Dante murmured against her ear. Force of habit, Grace said. Some things don't change. No, Dante agreed, and there was something in his voice now that had not been there the first night, something unguarded and entirely his own. But some things do. I did not know how to want anything gently before you. I am still learning. Grace turned to face him fully, the gold light of the chandelier catching the old scar along his jaw, the same scar she had traced with her fingers more times now than she could count, and found herself smiling in a way that felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, entirely unafraid. Then keep learning, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Dante Moretti, a man who had built his entire life on never losing control of a room, let his composure slip completely in front of 200 witnesses and kissed her like the answer to a question he had stopped expecting anyone to ask him honestly. If you found yourself holding your breath through every page of Grace and Dante's story, you already know exactly what to do next. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next dangerous, slow-burning romance waiting for you on this channel. Drop a comment telling me which moment made your heart stop, whether it was the ballroom, the parking garage, or that dining room table confession, and give this video a like if you want more stories where the woman saves herself first, and the mafia boss simply has the good sense to fall in love with her for it. New stories drop regularly, so stay close. You never know which room the next dangerous man is watching you from.